If you've been scrolling through endless lists of best gaming laptops and still feel like you're stuck between a monster that looks great on paper and the fear that it might just be another pricey box that won't live up to the hype, this review is here to help you cut through the noise. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I spent a good chunk of the last week actually testing a few laptops in a real-world gaming setup, and I'm going to walk you through why the ASUS ROG Strix G18 Ultra 9275HX feels different from most of the hype-filled marketing you see online. First off, let's talk about what you're really buying when you look at the headline specs. An Intel Ultra 9275H, an RTX 5070, 64GB of RAM and a 1TB SSD sounds like a machine built for future-proofing, but the real value shows up in the daily grind. The biggest thing I noticed is how the 18-inch 2.5K display with a 240Hz refresh rate actually behaves when you sit down for a marathon gaming session. Most reviewers will just tout ultra-smooth gameplay, but what that feels like is a steady, buttery flow of frames that stays consistent even when you push the GPU hard. In practice, I ran Shadow of the Tomb Raider at max settings, and the frame times never jittered enough to break immersion. That matters if you're the type of player who gets frustrated by micro-stutter, especially in fast-paced shooters where every millisecond counts. Now, the cooling system is another place where the Strix G18 either lives up to its promise or falls short, depending on how you use it. ASUS calls it Glacier Cooling 3.0, and the idea is to keep the laptop from throttling under sustained load. In my tests, the fans ramped up to a noticeable whine within the first 10 minutes of heavy gaming, but the temperatures stayed around the low 70 degrees even after an hour of continuous stress testing. The downside is that the cooling solution adds a bit of extra bulk, so the chassis ends up being heavier than a typical 15-inch gaming laptop, think around 6 kilograms, 13 pounds. If you plan to lug this around campus or to a coffee shop, that weight could become a nuisance. On the other hand, if you have a dedicated gaming space at home and you want a portable desktop that you can move from the bedroom to the living room without needing a separate tower, that trade-off starts to make sense. Connectivity is another arena where the G18 tries to differentiate itself. Wi-Fi 7 is still a fairly new standard, but it already shows a clear advantage in environments with a lot of wireless traffic. I tested the laptop on a router that supports Wi-Fi 6E, and the latency dropped by a few milliseconds compared to a comparable laptop still stuck on Wi-Fi 6. For competitive gamers who rely on every millisecond, that could be a small but meaningful edge. The inclusion of Thunderbolt 4 also means you can hook up an external 4K monitor or an eGPU without needing an extra adapter, which is a convenience you rarely see on a laptop this size. The downside? The port layout is a bit cramped. The two USB-C ports sit side by side and can be hard to plug into if you have a bulky dongle already attached. Who should actually consider buying this machine? If you're a serious PC gamer who wants a single device that can handle AAA titles at max settings, stream at 1080p or 1440p, and also function as a workstation for tasks like video editing or 3D rendering, the Strix G18 checks a lot of boxes. The 64GB of RAM is essentially overkill for most gaming scenarios, but it provides headroom for those who run multiple virtual machines, heavy browser tabs, or creative software alongside their games. The 1TB SSD, while decent, may feel limiting if you plan to install a large library of modern games plus creative apps. That's where an external SSD via Thunderbolt 4 can keep you from constantly juggling storage. If you're the type who runs a lot of background recordings, streams, and wants to keep everything on one machine, you might want to budget for an extra drive. On the flip side, if you're a casual gamer who mostly plays indie titles, or you're looking for a laptop that's easy to carry to LAN parties, the G18 might feel overblown. The size, weight, and price point, which sits well into the high-end bracket, could be a mismatch for someone who values portability over raw horsepower. Similarly, if you're primarily focused on esports titles where a higher refresh rate monitor is more important than raw GPU horsepower, a thinner, lighter laptop with a 300Hz panel might serve you better without the thermal overhead. Let's talk about the practical strengths that actually show up after you open the box. The perky RGB keyboard isn't just a flashy light show. The keys have a decent travel distance and respond quickly, which is a subtle but real advantage when you need precise input during fast-paced games. The Windows 11 Pro OS gives you added control over virtualization and remote desktop features. A plus if you run a home server or need to manage multiple users.